Hello, I'm Casey Koss, host of the podcast Casey's Cause, where I take an unconventional approach to some of the hottest issues of the day and hopefully inspire or even provoke critical thinking along the way. My goal is for us to find common ground through a fresh point of view. I invite you to join me on this journey. Welcome to Casey's Cause. I'm your host, Casey Koss. Gun control tower? What if the demand for aviation safety was the same for guns? My father was both an airline pilot and a gun owner. He instilled in me a love of aviation as an aesthetic that will never depart my soul. He did not feel the same about guns, however. And although my dad had no particular love for firearms, he considered a gun to be a practical tool. He grew up in rural Illinois, where a gun was essential to help keep critters like wolves, deer, rabbits, and even birds away from livestock and crops. And there was the occasional hunt, primarily for fowl, but other wild animals were fair game back in the Depression, when food insecurity was an understatement. Gun owners were not as obsessed with a national safety program back then, but today, America has a gun violence problem in our metropolitan urban centers. For example, here in Pasadena, California, gun violence increased by 85% in 2020 compared to the previous year, perhaps driven by the impact of the pandemic, and then continued to increase 22% between 2020 and 2021, from 60 to 73 shootings. 7 were killed in 2020 and 6 more in 2023, according to the Pasadena Police Department. Mid-year 2024 gang intervention statistics showed a downward trend in gang violence, thanks to the implementation of the Pasadena Gang Violence Outreach and Interruption Services Program. Still, overall, Pasadena gun violence has increased. Nationwide, almost 49,000 people died from gun-related injuries in 2021. That is the most recent year that the CDC compiled complete data. And of that number, more than 26,000, or 54%, were suicides, while almost 21,000, or 43%, were murders. And gun murders, in particular, increased 45% between 2019 and 2021. The remaining gun deaths in 2021, more than 1,000, were accidents, involved law enforcement, or had undetermined circumstances. Although we know that the pandemic played a role in the increase of gun violence, could common sense gun safety regulations have slowed or reversed this trend? Sadly, we will never know for certain. This is in stark contrast to the lessons learned and applied in the aviation industry. From the moment of the first fatality in a powered aircraft, aviation became safety obsessed. U.S. Army Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge was killed and Orville Wright severely injured when the Wright brothers' aircraft, the Wright Flyer, crashed during a demonstration for the Army at Fort Myer, Virginia on September 17, 1908. Prior to the crash, my great-grandfather took my grandfather as a young child to see one of the several demonstrations performed by Orville Wright at Fort Myer in September. Unfortunately, on that day, my relatives were not to witness the modern miracle of controlled flight because the demonstration was canceled due to inclement weather. However, when it was determined that the subsequent crash was caused by a cracked propeller vibrating a stabilizing wire loose, the Army called off any further demonstrations until the Wright brothers came up with engineering solutions to minimize, if not eliminate, the possibility of this catastrophic failure. And the Wright brothers suffered economically as well, when the War Department postponed taking delivery of the Wright Flyers until the following summer. Right away, the fledgling aviation industry learned to minimize risk through relentless and careful engineering and limitless regulation. I particularly recall that my entire household had to quietly accommodate the number of hours of sleep my dad was required to have before piloting a commercial flight, as mandated by the Federal Aviation Administration. In fact, practically everything in aviation is regulated, and I mean everything. Sleep is the least of it. A long-standing adage for those of us in general aviation or private pleasure flying is, you can't fly anywhere without violating at least one or more Federal Aviation Regulations, FARs. And after the crash of two Boeing 737 MAX airliners in 2018 and 2019 that killed 346 people, Boeing Aircraft reluctantly agreed to plead guilty to conspiring to defraud the FAA for knowingly making false representations about the key onboard software that caused the crashes. This, as we know, is not true of the gun industry in our country. Gun manufacturers and dealers in the U.S. are protected from being held liable when crimes have been committed with their products. The Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act passed into law in 2005, but the gun industry can still be held liable for damages resulting from defective products, breach of contract, criminal misconduct, and other actions for which they are directly responsible. However, the airline industry has no such immunity when an airliner, for instance, is used to commit a crime, such as occurred on 9/11/2001. The manufacturer of the airliners, Boeing Company, along with both American Airlines and United Airlines, were all sued for not protecting passengers and property once the hijackers took control. It is my contention that this legal liability in aviation results in accountability on all levels. But does that make airline travel any safer, you might ask? A statistician at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Arnold Barnett, who studies airline safety, found that from 2019 to 2022, the chances of a passenger being killed on a flight anywhere in the world was 1 in 13.4 million. A stark difference from 1968 to 1977, when that chance was only 1 in 350,000. Safety obsession has rendered airline travel the safest form of travel in the world per passenger mile. The editor-in-chief of Airline Ratings, Jeffrey Thomas, who publishes an annual list of the safest airlines, says, quote, that one of the things about aviation, as time goes by, is that manufacturers and airlines learn from their mistakes and put systems in place to ensure they don't make them again. So statistically, over time, flying gets safer and safer and safer, unquote. Not true of guns. Although we have crime investigations, there are no investigations into how to prevent the use of guns in a given crime, like assassination attempts, not just one, but two. Even in the developed world, our gun safety record here in the U.S. is abysmal. Among 65 high-income countries and territories, the U.S. ranks 7th in the number of homicides by firearm. In fact, Puerto Rico ranks 1st, and the U.S. Virgin Islands 4th, 2 U.S. territories out of 65 on the list. Every aviation accident is investigated to determine the cause and how to prevent similar accidents in the future. Imagine if we took that approach to every single incident of gun violence, and imagine if the gun manufacturers were liable for crimes committed with their products. Then you would be applying airline industry accountability to gun manufacturers every day. I assure you that the gun manufacturers would use all technological and regulatory means to prevent the criminal use of their product, just like all the stakeholders in the airline industries do. I'm just saying, shouldn't we give common sense gun safety obsession a real chance to live as safely as we fly?